What the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the American Law Enforcement and Intelligence Agency, whose warnings about digital threats carry the weight of direct operational knowledge about criminal activities, that the FBI's own investigations, its own cybercrime task forces, its own digital forensics teams, and the broader American intelligence community's surveillance of the criminal ecosystems that are targeting American consumers and American financial institutions have provided through years of painstaking investigative work that has given the FBI an understanding of exactly how specific applications are being used to steal money from ordinary people, that no outside security researcher, no academic cybersecurity laboratory, and no consumer protection organization operating without access to the FBI's investigative intelligence could possess with the same specificity, the same operational detail, and the same direct evidentiary foundation that makes an FBI warning about a specific application not simply another entry in the endless stream of cybersecurity advisories that the technology security community produces, but a statement of direct law enforcement knowledge grounded in actual criminal investigations, actual victim interviews, actual financial forensics, and actual intelligence about the criminal operations that are using a specific application to steal millions of dollars from the people who downloaded it believing it was safe, has just issued about a specific application that presents itself as safe, that markets itself as safe, that has been downloaded by millions of users who believe the application's own characterization of itself as a trustworthy and legitimate tool for the specific function it claims to perform, and that has in fact been operating as a vehicle for the systematic theft of personal information, financial credentials, banking access, and in many cases the direct transfer of funds from the victim's accounts to accounts controlled by the criminal operation behind an application whose entire existence, whose entire marketing strategy, and whose entire user acquisition effort has been built around the deliberate deception of the users who downloaded it in the belief that they were installing something that would help them, rather than something that would steal from them. The specific application that the FBI is warning about, the one that has stolen millions from the people who trusted it enough to install it on the devices that contain their most sensitive personal and financial information, belongs to the category of applications that security researchers describe as fleeceware or malicious utility applications, a category whose defining characteristic is the presentation of a seemingly legitimate and seemingly useful function to attract downloads from users who have a genuine need for the service the application claims to provide, while the application's actual purpose, concealed beneath the legitimate surface functionality that makes the application appear credible and valuable, is the collection of sensitive personal and financial information from the device, the establishment of persistent access to the device's data and functions, and ultimately the exploitation of the information and the access obtained through the application's installation to steal money from the victims through mechanisms that range from unauthorized subscription charges that appear on the victim's payment accounts to the direct credential theft that gives the criminal operators access to the victim's banking applications and financial accounts, to the more sophisticated financial fraud operations that use the personal information harvested from the application to impersonate the victim for identity theft, fraudulent credit applications, and the full range of financial crimes that comprehensive personal data enables against individuals whose information has been harvested without their knowledge or their consent. The mechanism by which the application that the FBI is warning about achieves its access to the sensitive information and the financial access that makes it such a valuable criminal tool. The specific technical approach through which an application that appears to provide a legitimate service actually operates as a data harvesting, credential stealing, and financial fraud enabling platform involves a combination of the permissions that the application requests during installation and that users grant without fully understanding their implications, the data that those permissions allow the application to access and transmit to servers controlled by the criminal operation behind it, and the specific fraudulent activities that the criminal operation conducts using the data and the access that the granted permissions provide. The permission requests that make this application so dangerous, the specific categories of access that the application requests from the device's operating system during or after installation, and that users grant because the application's framing of those requests makes them appear necessary for the application's stated legitimate function, encompass the access to sensitive device resources and sensitive personal data that the criminal operation behind the application needs to execute its theft operations, including, in many documented cases, access to SMS messages that allows the application to intercept banking authentication codes, access to the device's contact list that provides personal information useful for social engineering and identity theft, access to the device's storage that allows the harvesting of documents, images, and other files that may contain sensitive personal and financial information, access to the device's microphone and camera that enable surveillance beyond what any legitimate utility application would require. And in some cases, the accessibility service permissions that give the application the ability to read and interact with every element of the device's screen, including the contents of banking applications and financial platforms that the user accesses. While the malicious application is installed, the data transmission that occurs in the background of the application's operation, the continuous or periodic transmission of harvested personal information, captured credentials, intercepted authentication codes, and other sensitive data from the victim's device to servers controlled by the criminal operation, is the mechanism through which the stolen information reaches the criminals who will use it to access the victim's financial accounts, impersonate the victim for fraudulent credit applications, and execute the full range of financial crimes that the harvested data enables. And it is a transmission that occurs without any user-visible indication that the application is conducting any data transfer beyond what its stated legitimate function would require, making the theft invisible to the victim until the consequences manifest in the form of unauthorized account access, fraudulent charges, or the other signs of financial compromise that may not appear until days, weeks, or even months after the initial data harvest occurred. The millions of dollars that this application has stolen, the aggregate financial harm that the FBI's investigation has documented across the full population of victims whose financial information, banking credentials, and account access were compromised through their installation of an application they believed was safe, represents not just the direct financial losses from unauthorized account access and fraudulent transactions, but the full cost of financial crime victimization that encompasses the fraudulent credit accounts opened using stolen identity information, the credit score damage that unauthorized credit applications and missed payments on fraudulent accounts produce, the time and the resource cost of the recovery process that requires contacting financial institutions, credit bureaus, law enforcement agencies, and the full range of institutions involved in addressing the consequences of financial identity theft, and the psychological and emotional impact of discovering that an application downloaded in good faith had been systematically stealing personal and financial information for use in crimes whose full extent may take months or years to fully identify and remediate. The FBI's investigative findings about how this application acquired its millions of downloads, the specific marketing strategies, distribution channels, user acquisition approaches, and credibility building mechanisms that the criminal operation behind this application used to convince millions of users that it was safe to install on their devices, reveal the sophistication of the criminal planning that goes into the most successful malicious application campaigns and the degree to which the conventional signals that users rely upon to assess an application's legitimacy have been successfully mimicked and manipulated by criminal actors who understand exactly what makes users trust an application and who have invested significant effort in creating the specific credibility indicators that would overcome the natural skepticism that users might otherwise apply to an unfamiliar application requesting access to sensitive device resources. The application store presence, the official distribution of the application through one or both of the major application stores, whose review processes trigger the automated scanning and the human review processes that the stores apply to submissions, and then either updating the application with more aggressive malicious functionality after it had been accepted, or operating the malicious data, harvesting from the application's initial version through mechanisms that the review process did not detect. The user reviews and ratings, the apparent social proof provided by the positive reviews and high ratings that the application displayed in its store listing, and that many users treat as a reliable indicator of application quality and trustworthiness, or in many documented cases of this type of malicious application, either fabricated through the coordinated posting of fake reviews by accounts controlled by the criminal operation, purchased through review manipulation services that generate artificial positive reviews for payment, or accumulated from the initial users who downloaded the application for its stated legitimate function and who provided positive reviews before this. Malicious data harvesting had produced consequences visible enough to prompt negative reviews. The FBI's recommendations for users who have already downloaded the application, the specific remediation steps that the FBI advises for people who may have installed the application and who need to address the potential consequences of having had a data harvesting application operating on their device, begin with the immediate deletion of the application from every device on which it has been installed, a step that terminates the ongoing data transmission and the ongoing access to device resources that the application has been exploiting, but that does not reverse the data already harvested and already transmitted to the criminal operations servers during the period the application was installed. The password change process that should follow immediately after deleting the application, updating the passwords for every financial account, every email account, every social media account, and every other sensitive account that was accessed from the device while the malicious application was installed, doing so from a different device that was never used while the malicious application was installed, to ensure that the new passwords are not immediately captured by the same data harvesting mechanism that compromised the original passwords, is the next most urgent remediation step, because the credential theft that these applications facilitate is often the most immediately consequential component of the financial harm they enable, and updating compromised credentials before they can be used to access the victim's accounts is the most direct and most immediately available way to limit the financial damage that the credential theft component of the application's harm would otherwise produce. The credit monitoring and credit freeze actions that should follow the immediate security remediation, placing credit freezes at all 3 major credit bureaus to prevent the opening of new fraudulent credit accounts using the identity information the application may have harvested, enrolling in credit monitoring services that provide alerts when new credit inquiries or new account openings occur in the victim's name, and reviewing existing credit reports for any fraudulent accounts or unauthorized inquiries that may already have been opened, using information harvested during the period the malicious application was installed, are protective measures whose importance derives from the reality that the personal information harvested by these applications is often used for identity theft operations that unfold over an extended period following the initial data harvest, making early implementation of credit protection measures essential for limiting the scope of the identity theft harm that may be initiated using the harvested information in the weeks and months following the application's deletion. The reporting action, submitting a complaint about the malicious application to the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center at ic3.gov, to the Federal Trade Commission, to the application store from which the application was downloaded, and to any financial institution whose accounts may have been affected by the application's data harvesting, is both a step toward the individual victim's own recovery process and a contribution to the collective law enforcement effort to identify, investigate, and prosecute the criminal operations behind malicious applications, because the aggregation of victim complaints provides law enforcement with the evidence of harm, the identification of victims, and the documentation of criminal activity that complex investigations of distributed financial crime operations require to develop the prosecutable cases that can result in criminal accountability for the operators of the most damaging malicious application campaigns. The protective measures that every smartphone user should implement to reduce their vulnerability to future malicious application campaigns of the type that the FBI is warning about encompass the device security settings, the application evaluation practices, and the post-installation monitoring behaviors that together create a meaningful defense against the malicious applications that continue to appear in official application stores despite the review processes those stores maintain, including the regular review of application permissions to identify any application that has accumulated access to sensitive device resources that its stated function does not require, the use of reputable mobile security applications that provide real-time scanning of newly installed applications for known malicious behaviors, and that monitor network traffic for the suspicious data transmissions that malicious applications conduct to their remote servers, the practice of researching applications thoroughly before installation by examining not just the star ratings but the specific content of written reviews that may reveal concerns about unexpected behavior, unauthorized charges, or privacy violations that indicate potential malicious activity, and the habit of treating any permission request for access to SMS messages, accessibility services, device administration, or other high sensitivity resources as a significant red flag that requires careful scrutiny of the specific justification before the permission is granted. Delete this application now if you have it installed. Follow the FBI's warning with the urgency that a law enforcement agency's direct evidence of an application stealing millions of dollars from the people who trusted it demands. Execute every remediation step that the FBI recommends for affected users. Implement the protective measures that reduce the risk of falling victim to the next malicious application campaign that will inevitably follow this one, and share this warning with every person in your life who uses a smartphone and who deserves to know that the FBI has identified a specific application that has been stealing millions from the people who thought it was safe. Because the most powerful protection against the criminal ecosystem of malicious applications that is operating at scale against ordinary smartphone users is the combination of official warnings from law enforcement agencies that know exactly what these applications are doing, and the widespread sharing of those warnings with the communities of users whose financial security depends on having access to this information before the malicious application finds its way onto their device, rather than after it has already stolen everything it came for. Like this video, if this complete, detailed, and urgently actionable analysis of the FBI's warning about the safe appearing application that stole millions gave you the understanding of how these applications operate, the specific remediation steps if you may have been affected, and the protective measures that reduce your vulnerability to the malicious application threat that law enforcement is warning about, with the specificity and the urgency that the scale of the documented theft demands from everyone in a position to communicate this warning to the smartphone users who need to hear it before their accounts become part of the millions of dollars that this application has already stolen. Subscribe to this channel for the kind of seriously researched law enforcement, informed, and genuinely protective digital security content that empowers ordinary smartphone users to protect themselves from the criminal applications that are actively and successfully stealing from the people who trust them. And tell me in the comments whether you or anyone you know has been affected by this type of malicious application, and what steps you are taking after watching this video to protect your device and your financial accounts from the next application that presents itself as safe while stealing everything it can access. See you in the next one.